You really think you belong in a place like this? The words didn't echo, they landed, heavy and deliberate, like something practiced too many times to count. The café had gone quiet in that subtle way, not silence exactly, but a tightening of space, like the air itself was holding its breath. Officer Daniel Reeves stood near the counter, his uniform crisp, badge catching the overhead light, one hand loosely wrapped around a paper cup that still steamed faintly. Across from him stood Lena Brooks, her posture calm, shoulders relaxed despite the attention now settling on her from every corner of the room. She didn't respond right away. Didn't look away either. Just stood there, hands folded gently in front of her, as if she had all the time in the world. Reeves tilted his head, a faint smirk forming, the kind that came from certainty, from knowing no one here would challenge him. The line behind Lena shifted slightly, a chair scraped somewhere near the window, and a barista froze mid-motion with a pitcher of milk still in hand. Outside, gray clouds pressed low over the street, threatening rain, the glass windows reflecting a dull, muted version of everything inside. Lena's coat was simple, worn at the sleeves, a faint crease running along one side like it had been folded too many times. A small canvas bag rested against her hip, the strap thin but sturdy, carrying whatever she needed for the day. Reeves took a slow sip, never breaking eye contact, then lowered the cup again. "I asked you a question," he said, his tone softer now, but sharper somehow, like a blade wrapped in velvet. Lena's eyes flicked, just once, not to him, but past him, to the corner of the ceiling where a small black dome camera blinked quietly, unnoticed by most. Then back to him. The movement was subtle, almost invisible, but intentional. "I'm just waiting for my order," she said finally, her voice even, unshaken, the kind of calm that didn't come from ignorance, but from something deeper, something earned. A few people exchanged glances. Someone near the doors shifted their phone slightly, angling it just enough. Reeves exhaled through his nose, amused, or maybe irritated, it was hard to tell. "You people always say that," he muttered, not loud enough to be a shout, but loud enough to be heard. The word hung there, undefined but understood. Lena didn't react. Not outwardly. Her fingers tightened just slightly around each other, then relaxed again. The smell of roasted coffee beans lingered in the air, warm and familiar, contrasting sharply with the tension threading through the room. Somewhere behind the counter, a name was called, but no one moved to claim it. Time stretched, thin and fragile. Reeves took another step closer, closing the small distance between them, his presence filling the space like a wall. Lena remained exactly where she was. Still. Steady. Watching. Waiting. The barista finally called a name that sounded close enough to hers, the syllables slightly rushed, slightly uncertain, and Lena stepped forward without correcting it, as if she had long accepted that small distortions were easier than explanations. She reached for the cup, her fingers careful around the cardboard sleeve, feeling the steady warmth seep into her skin, grounding, familiar, something predictable in a room that had quietly shifted away from her. Up close, the counter smelled stronger, a blend of dark roast and steamed milk, layered with the faint sweetness of vanilla syrup lingering in the air. She thanked the barista with a small nod, her voice soft but clear, then turned, not toward the door immediately, but toward the narrow space by the window where the light came in muted and gray. Outside, the street was beginning to blur as the first drops of rain tapped against the glass, slow and deliberate, leaving thin trails that bent the reflections of passing cars and distant figures. Lena stood there for a moment, cup in both hands, her gaze not fixed on anything in particular, just observing, absorbing, the way she always did. She had been coming to places like this for years, not because she belonged, but because she refused to believe that belonging was something granted by others. Her mornings started early, long before the city found its rhythm, cleaning offices that would never remember her name, wiping down glass tables that reflected faces she would never meet. By the time people like Reeves put on their uniforms, she had already lived half a day, quietly, efficiently, without leaving a trace. The canvas bag at her side shifted slightly as she moved, the worn fabric brushing against her coat, and inside it, neatly folded, were things that told a different story than the one anyone here would guess: a small notebook filled with careful handwriting, a stack of envelopes tied with a rubber band, a photograph tucked between pages, edges softened from time. Her phone, old and cracked along one corner, vibrated once, then stilled. She did not check it. Not yet. She had learned to let urgency wait when it could, to choose her moments instead of reacting to them. Behind her, the low hum of conversation began to return in fragments, cautious at first, then slightly louder, like a room testing whether it was safe to move again. A chair slid back into place, a cup was set down a little too hard, someone laughed, but it did not quite reach their eyes. Lena took a small sip, the heat steady, not too much, just enough, and exhaled slowly, her breath faint against the lid. She glanced once more toward the ceiling camera, its tiny red light blinking with quiet consistency, recording everything without judgment, without interruption. Then she shifted her weight, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder, and turned slightly toward the door, her movements unhurried, her presence unchanged, as if nothing had happened at all, and yet something beneath the surface had already begun to move, subtle and certain, like rain gathering before it becomes a storm. Reeves did not move when she stepped away, but his eyes followed her, narrowing slightly as if something about her calm unsettled him more than any argument could have. He had dealt with loud people, angry people, people who demanded and shouted and tried to challenge him in public, and those situations were simple, predictable, almost routine, but this quiet, this refusal to react, it left no clear path forward, no obvious way to assert control without drawing more attention than he wanted. He shifted his stance, the leather of his duty belt creaking softly, and glanced around the café, noticing the subtle changes he had caused, the way conversations had not fully recovered, the way a few customers kept their eyes lowered while others pretended to be absorbed in their phones, their screens glowing faintly in the dim light. The rain outside had picked up, tapping faster against the windows now, a steady rhythm that filled the small gaps between voices. Reeves walked slowly toward the window area, not close enough to stand beside her, but close enough to remain in her space, his presence deliberate, measured. From this angle, he could see her reflection in the glass, layered over the gray street beyond, her figure steady, her hands still wrapped around the cup as if nothing in the world had shifted. He frowned slightly, something in his expression tightening, not anger exactly, but irritation mixed with curiosity. He had read reports, attended briefings, sat through hours of departmental training that spoke about perception and community and restraint, but out here, in real spaces with real people, those words often felt distant, abstract, easy to ignore when instinct took over. To him, authority had always been simple, a uniform, a badge, a presence that should be enough to command respect without question. Yet here stood someone who did not challenge him and did not submit either, and that quiet balance felt like resistance in a form he did not know how to confront. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling briefly, not really reading anything, just giving his hands something to do, a way to ground himself in familiarity. A notification blinked across the screen, something about an internal review, a reminder of paperwork he had delayed, and he dismissed it with a quick swipe, his jaw tightening for just a second before smoothing out again. Outside, a car passed slowly through the rain, tires hissing against wet pavement, headlights stretching across the glass in long, distorted lines. Inside, the camera in the corner continued its quiet recording, capturing angles and moments that would later play back with perfect clarity, without emotion, without bias. Reeves slipped his phone back into his pocket, and looked again at Lena, this time longer, as if trying to place her, to understand what it was about her that felt out of place in a way he could not name. She did not look at him. She did not acknowledge him again. She simply stood there, steady and composed, as if she had already moved past the moment that still held him in place, and that, more than anything, unsettled him, because it suggested that whatever he thought he controlled had already slipped quietly beyond his reach. The door chimed softly as someone entered, a brief interruption that pulled a few glances toward the front before attention drifted back to the quiet tension near the window. Lena adjusted her grip on the cup and finally took a step forward, her shoes making almost no sound against the polished floor, her movement calm, deliberate, as if she had already decided how this moment would end long before anyone else realized it had begun. Reeves watched her shift, his eyes narrowing slightly, and something in him resisted the idea of letting her simply walk away, not because she had done anything wrong, but because her composure felt like a challenge he could not quite define. He stepped forward, closing the space more directly this time, his presence no longer just nearby but clearly in her path, enough to be noticed, enough to require a response. A few heads turned again, subtle but unmistakable, the room tightening once more around them. Lena stopped, not abruptly, just enough to acknowledge the change, her gaze lifting to meet his without hesitation. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. The rain outside grew louder, tapping faster against the glass, the sound filling the silence between them like a quiet countdown. Reeves shifted his weight and let out a small breath through his nose, then spoke again, his voice low but firm. "You should be more careful where you stand," he said, his tone carrying that same controlled edge, as if the statement were both advice and warning. Lena looked at him, not with defiance, not with fear, but with a steady clarity that made the moment feel heavier than it should have been. "I am exactly where I need to be," she replied, her voice even, each word placed carefully, not rushed, not softened. The words hung in the air longer than expected. Someone near the counter stopped mid-sip, a cup hovering inches from their lips. Reeves gave a short, humorless laugh, glancing briefly around as if to check whether anyone else found the exchange amusing, but no one responded. The lack of reaction seemed to press back on him, subtle but real. He took another step, close enough now that the faint scent of coffee and rain mixed between them, his shadow cutting slightly across hers on the floor. "You think this is about you?" he said, quieter now, almost conversational, but with something tighter underneath. Lena did not move. Her hands remained steady around the cup, the warmth still rising faintly through the lid. "No," she said softly. "It never is." The simplicity of the answer landed in a way that words with more force might not have. Reeves held her gaze for a moment longer, searching for something, a reaction, a weakness, any sign that would restore the balance he was used to. But there was nothing to take. No anger. No apology. Just stillness. Behind them, the camera continued its silent watch, its small red light blinking steadily, capturing the shift in posture, the distance between them, the way the room leaned inward without moving. Outside, the rain blurred the city into streaks of gray and silver, the world beyond the glass continuing on, unaware or uninterested in what was unfolding inside. Lena took a small step to the side, not pushing past him, just creating space where there had been none, her movement subtle but clear. For a second, it seemed like Reeves might block her again, might insist on holding the moment in place, but something in the way she moved, or perhaps in the way the room had changed around them, made him hesitate. That hesitation, brief as it was, shifted everything. Lena stepped forward and walked past him, her shoulder passing just enough to mark the distance, her pace unchanged, her focus already ahead. Reeves turned slightly as she moved by, his expression tightening, not fully understanding why the moment felt like something slipping through his hands. The door chimed again as she reached it, the sound soft but final, and the rain outside waited, steady and patient, as if it had been there all along, ready to receive her. The door closed behind Lena with a soft click that seemed louder than it should have been, sealing the warmth of the café inside and releasing her into the cool weight of the rain. The air outside carried a sharp chill, the kind that settled quickly into fabric, into skin, into breath. She stepped onto the sidewalk without hesitation, the drizzle already gathering along the edges of her coat, darkening the worn material in slow spreading patterns. Cars passed in steady lines, headlights reflecting off the wet pavement in long streaks of white and amber, the city continuing forward without pause. Inside, Reeves remained where he was for a moment longer, staring at the door as if expecting it to open again, as if the moment might reverse itself if he waited long enough. But it did not. The low hum of conversation returned behind him, quieter this time, more cautious, like a room that had learned something it could not yet explain. He turned slowly, scanning the space, catching fragments of glances that disappeared the second they met his, people returning to their cups, their phones, their conversations that no longer felt entirely separate from what had just happened. His jaw tightened slightly, and he exhaled, longer this time, as if trying to release something that refused to leave. He moved toward the counter again, placing the empty cup down with a little more force than necessary, the sound sharp against the softer background noise. The barista nodded quickly, avoiding eye contact, hands moving faster than before, as if efficiency could erase discomfort. Reeves glanced toward the window, where the rain had thickened, the glass now layered with overlapping trails that blurred the outside world into shifting gray shapes. Through it, he could still make out Lena's figure moving along the sidewalk, steady, unhurried, her pace unchanged despite the weather. Something about that steadiness pulled at him, not in admiration, not even in respect, but in a way that felt closer to unease. He reached into his pocket again, pulling out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen for a second before unlocking it. A message notification blinked at the top, Internal Affairs, marked urgent. He stared at it longer this time, the words settling differently now, heavier, more present. He did not open it immediately. Instead, he looked back up, toward the window, toward the place where Lena had been just seconds before. Outside, she paused briefly under the edge of an awning, adjusting the strap of her canvas bag, her fingers moving with quiet precision. The rain traced along the edge above her, dripping in steady intervals, each drop catching the dim light before falling. She shifted her cup from one hand to the other, then reached into her bag, pulling out her phone. The cracked screen flickered to life, a faint glow against the gray afternoon. She glanced at it, her expression unchanged, then typed something slowly, deliberately, before slipping it back inside. There was no rush in her movements, no sign of the moment she had just left behind. Inside, Reeves finally tapped the notification, the message opening with a short line that made his brow tighten almost instantly. A request. A review. Footage. The word lingered on the screen longer than the rest. His eyes flicked, almost involuntarily, toward the small black dome camera in the corner of the ceiling, its red light still blinking, steady, consistent, unchanged. For the first time, the presence of that small device felt larger than the room itself. Outside, Lena stepped away from the awning and back into the rain, her figure moving forward, gradually blending into the gray rhythm of the street, while behind her, something unseen had already begun to shift, quiet but irreversible, like a line that had been crossed without anyone noticing until it was too late to step back. The rain settled into a steady rhythm, no longer a drizzle but a consistent fall that softened the edges of the city, turning sharp lines into blurred reflections that stretched across the pavement like quiet echoes. Lena walked without rushing, her steps measured, her shoes darkening slightly with each contact against the wet ground, the fabric of her coat absorbing the moisture in slow, spreading patterns. The noise of traffic faded behind the sound of water, tires moving through shallow puddles, distant horns muffled by the thickening air. She did not look back. Not once. Her path remained forward, steady, as if the moment inside the café had already been placed behind her, filed away with countless others that never needed to be spoken aloud. A bus passed by, its large frame cutting through the gray light, windows glowing faintly from within, carrying faces that remained indistinct, anonymous, separate from the quiet story unfolding outside. Lena reached a crosswalk and paused, the red hand blinking steadily on the signal posts, counting down in bright digital numbers that reflected faintly on the wet metal pole beside it. She stood there, her cup now half empty, the warmth fading but still present, a small constant in a shifting environment. The city moved around her, people passing with umbrellas angled against the rain, footsteps quick, purposeful, each person wrapped in their own direction, their own urgency. Lena remained still, her breathing even, her gaze calm, watching the numbers drop, each second marked clearly, predictably. Across the street, a black SUV slowed near the curb, its engine low, almost silent, the tinted windows reflecting the gray sky above. It did not stand out at first, just another vehicle in a line of many, but it did not move on when the light changed. It waited. Inside, shapes shifted, subtle movements behind the glass, indistinct but present. Lena did not react immediately. She stepped forward when the signal changed, crossing at a natural pace, her focus unchanged, but her awareness sharpened in ways that were not visible to anyone watching. Halfway across, the rain seemed to intensify for a moment, droplets striking the pavement with a sharper sound, bouncing lightly before disappearing into the thin film of water that covered the street. The SUV door opened just as she reached the opposite curb, the motion smooth, deliberate. A man stepped out, tall, composed, dressed in a dark coat that contrasted sharply with the pale gray surroundings. He did not call out to her. He did not rush. He simply stood there, watching her approach, his posture straight, his presence controlled in a way that suggested intention rather than coincidence. Lena slowed slightly, just enough to acknowledge the shift without breaking her rhythm completely. Her eyes lifted, meeting his for a brief second, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, not surprise, not confusion, but recognition layered with something deeper, something that had been building long before this intersection, long before the rain began to fall. The city continued around them, unaware, indifferent, the sound of water and distant movement filling the space between their silence. Lena reached the curb and stopped, the edge of the sidewalk marking a quiet boundary between what had been and what was about to unfold, her cup still in her hand, her shoulders relaxed, her presence unchanged, even as the air around her seemed to shift once more, subtle and undeniable, like the pause before something finally reveals itself. The man did not extend his hand, did not introduce himself, and did not break the silence immediately, as if he understood that whatever this moment was, it did not need to be rushed into words. Rain traced along the shoulders of his coat, collecting at the edges before falling in steady drops to the pavement below, each one marking time in a way that felt more deliberate now. Lena stood across from him, her cup still in hand, the warmth nearly gone, her fingers steady despite the chill settling into the air. For a brief second, the world narrowed to just the two of them, the city fading into a soft blur of motion and sound behind the curtain of rain. Then he spoke, his voice low, controlled, carrying a clarity that cut clean through the muted noise around them. They reviewed the footage, he said, not as a question, not as an announcement, but as a fact already settled. Lena did not respond immediately. Her gaze remained on him, calm, measured, as if weighing not the words themselves, but the timing of them. A car passed behind him, headlights sweeping across the wet street and briefly illuminating the side of his face, revealing the faint tension along his jaw, the restraint held carefully in place. "I assumed they would," she replied after a moment, her voice even, untouched by surprise. The man nodded once, a small movement, precise. "Internal affairs flagged it within minutes," he continued, reaching into his coat and pulling out a slim leather folder dark and worn at the edges from use. He did not open it yet. There were already complaints tied to his name. This one made it visible. The rain intensified slightly, the sound sharpening against the ground, against the metal frame of a nearby street sign, against the roof of the SUV still idling quietly at the curb. Lena shifted her weight just enough to ease the pressure on one foot, her posture unchanged, her presence grounded. "Visibility changes things," she said softly, almost to herself, though he heard it clearly. He studied her for a second longer, then finally opened the folder, revealing a stack of printed documents, the top page marked with bold lettering and official insignia. "Marcus Brooks," he said, not as an introduction now, but as a confirmation, his eyes meeting hers again. "Civil Rights Division." The name settled into the space between them, not heavy, not dramatic, just present, like a key placed quietly on a table. Lena gave a small nod, acknowledging what had never needed to be explained. Across the street, a pedestrian slowed slightly, glancing in their direction before moving on, unaware of the weight carried in a conversation that seemed, from the outside, almost ordinary. Marcus closed the folder partway, his grip steady, his tone shifting just slightly, not softer, but more personal. "He did not know," he said, the words measured, intentional. Lena's eyes flickered for the first time, not with surprise, but with something deeper, something that carried memory, history, years that stretched far beyond this rain-soaked intersection. "No," she said quietly. "He did not." The statement held no bitterness, no anger, just truth. Marcus exhaled slowly, the breath visible for a brief moment in the cool air before disappearing. "He will," he added, not as a threat, not as a promise, but as an inevitability shaped by everything already set in motion. The rain continued to fall, steady and unrelenting, washing the street clean in thin, reflective layers, while beneath it, unseen by anyone passing by, the balance had already shifted, not with noise or force, but with quiet certainty that could no longer be undone. Marcus did not rush the next words, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the rain filling the silence like a steady curtain that softened everything except the truth between them. He closed the folder fully this time, holding it at his side, not as a shield, not as a weapon, but as something already decided, already in motion. Lena looked at him, her expression unchanged, her presence grounded in a way that did not need validation, and that was what made the moment different from any confrontation Marcus had ever handled in a courtroom or across a conference table. This was not about winning. It never had been. "They want a statement," Marcus said finally, his voice quieter now, the edge replaced by something more measured, more human. "Not for the report. For the pattern." The word lingered, heavier than the rest. Lena's gaze shifted briefly past him, toward the street, toward the movement of strangers who would never know her name, never know what had just unfolded in the span of a few minutes. She took a slow breath, the cool air filling her lungs steady, controlled. "I have given statements before," she said, not with frustration, not with pride, just a simple acknowledgement of history repeating itself in different forms. Marcus nodded once, his jaw tightening slightly, not in disagreement, but in recognition. "I know," he replied. "That is why this one matters." The rain tapped against the roof of the SUV, against the pavement, against the quiet space between them, as if marking time for a decision that did not need to be forced. Lena looked down at the cup in her hands, now nearly empty, the faint warmth gone, replaced by the cool dampness of the air around her. She turned it slightly, watching a thin line of rainwater trace along the lid, collecting before slipping down the side. Small things. Details. Anchors in moments that could easily become too large. "He will say it was nothing," she said softly. Marcus did not interrupt. "He will say it was a misunderstanding. A bad day. A moment taken out of context." Her voice remained calm, each word placed carefully, not to convince, but to state what she already understood. Marcus exhaled slowly, a breath that carried both agreement and restraint. "He can say that," he answered. "But the camera does not forget context." Lena lifted her eyes back to his, and for a brief second, something shifted there, not doubt, not fear, but a quiet acknowledgement of what could happen next, of what would follow once things moved beyond this intersection, beyond this rain, into rooms where decisions carried weight and consequences took form. "And you?" she asked, her voice still even, but more direct now. "What do you want from it?" The question did not accuse. It did not challenge. It simply asked. Marcus held her gaze, not looking away, not deflecting. "The same thing you have always given," he said after a moment. "A record that cannot be ignored." The words settled between them, clear, unembellished. Lena considered them, not quickly, not slowly, just enough. Then she shifted her grip on the cup and stepped slightly closer, closing the small distance between them, her movement subtle but intentional. "Then write it," she said. "Not just what happened. Write how it always happens." Marcus nodded once, the weight of her words landing deeper than any formal statement ever could. In the distance, a siren passed faintly, its sound stretched thin by the rain, fading as quickly as it came. The city continued unaware, but something here had already taken shape, not loud, not dramatic, but steady and undeniable, like the rain that did not ask permission to fall, only continued, drop by drop, until everything it touched was changed. The rain did not stop, but it softened, easing from a steady fall into a quieter rhythm that settled over the street like a long exhale. Lena stood for a moment longer, the empty cup still in her hand, its purpose finished, its warmth gone, and then she moved, not abruptly, not ceremonially, just a simple step forward that carried her past the edge of the moment they had shared. Marcus did not follow immediately. He remained where he was, watching her walk, his posture still, his expression composed. But something behind his eyes had shifted, something deeper than professional resolve, something shaped long before any title or position had ever defined him. Lena reached a nearby trash bin and paused, placing the cup inside with a quiet, deliberate motion, the soft sound of paper against metal barely audible beneath the rain. She wiped her hands lightly against her coat, not out of discomfort, but out of habit, small actions that grounded her in the ordinary even as the weight of something larger lingered in the air. The city continued around her, headlights moving, footsteps passing, conversations rising and falling in fragments that never quite reached her. She adjusted the strap of her canvas bag again and stepped away from the curb, her pace steady, her direction clear, as if she had already returned to the path she had been walking long before this day had asked anything of her. Behind her, Marcus finally moved, opening the SUV door but not getting in right away. He looked once more at the intersection, at the rain tracing thin lines across the pavement, at the place where two lives had crossed in a way that would not be forgotten, even if no one else ever understood it. He slid into the vehicle, closing the door with a soft, controlled motion, and the engine hummed slightly as the driver pulled away from the curb. Inside, the folder rested on his lap, unopened now, its contents no longer just documents, but a continuation of something that had been building long before this moment found its shape. He did not look down at it. Not yet. Outside, Lena's figure grew smaller as she moved along the sidewalk, blending gradually into the rhythm of the city, her presence becoming part of the background once more, just another person walking through the rain, unnoticed, unremarked, but unchanged in the ways that mattered. The light at the intersection shifted from red to green, casting a faint glow across the wet street, and traffic began to move again, slow at first, then steady, as if the world had simply resumed where it had paused. In the distance, the cafe door opened again, new customers stepping inside, unaware of what had taken place, unaware of the quiet line that had been drawn and crossed in the span of a few minutes. The camera inside continued its silent recording, its small red light blinking with the same steady rhythm, holding on to a moment that would not fade, even as everything around it moved forward. And out here, under a sky that had begun to clear just slightly at the edges, Lena walked on, her shoulders relaxed, her breath even, carrying nothing more than what she had always carried, and leaving behind something that did not need to be seen to be understood, a quiet shift, a balance restored not through force, but through the simple refusal to lose herself in a moment that had tried, and failed, to define her.